Pre-Columbian art, so named because it occurs before the arrival of Columbus. Before embarking on recorded history and the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, I'd like to look at the very beginnings of the agricultural revolution, before the division of labour quickly accelerated into warring city-states competing for limited resources. One of the themes of the next section on pre-Columbian art is on the relationship between man and nature, and I particularly like this quote from the explorer and pioneer ecologist Thor Heyerdahl. It's a paraphrase of the idea from E.F. Schumacher that to talk of a battle with nature is already to have lost the war, that only by understanding our place in nature can we achieve the well-being so vital to our species. So, as we move from the Neolithic into what we would start to recognize as a civilization, where the agricultural revolution brings the accompanying awareness of the importance of the heavens in predicting the seasons, and increase in the organization of time through the development of the calendar. The agricultural revolution is the turn away from hunter-gathering to deliberate and selective cultivation of crops, and, subject to harvest, a permanent food source. More importantly, as said, this leaves large swathes of the population free to divide labour into the creation of artifacts and art. It allowed the building of permanent dwellings and other constructions, and in some cases walled cities, the first being the 8th century Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. However, taking the geographical definition of Europe, of the Azores to the Urals, I wanted to get away from the Eurocentric focus that an art history dominated by Western art has, to look at the art and civilization of the people who crossed the Bering Straits between Russia and Alaska in the last ice age 15,000 to 12,000 years ago, and gradually colonized the Americas. The abundance of the great American plains sustained the nomadic hunter-gatherer societies. The first civilizations were further south. Looking at a timeline by area of Central and South America, we can see that the first significant civilization was the Olmecs, corresponding roughly with the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Since this culture begins a chronology which developed into the most significant city-states of the Americas, namely the Mayans and the Aztecs, we'll come back to this area in a while, but we'll start with South America first, to gain insight into post-agricultural but pre-civilized society. And I would stress here that I'm using the term in its literal sense of a society before the creation of cities. Civilization also connotes qualities of complex collective belief systems, of a shared sense of community, of dedicated philosophical inquiry, and elements of these can be found at the San Agustin societies that we're about to look at. And also let's remember that Mohandas Gandhi, when asked for his opinion of Western civilization, said with disdain that he thought it would be a good idea. So, just to place these cultures geographically, the Olmecs here on the northern coast of Mexico, the Aztecs across the Yucatan Peninsula, the Mayans down into Central America, modern-day Guatemala, but here on the Bolivian Altiplano, before climatic change brought agricultural catastrophe, the first civilizations formed in the Americas. The Altiplano, or high plain, is a huge plateau, in some places at 4,000 meters above sea level, and it's incredibly dry today, but 3 millennia ago could sustain agriculture. The climatic changes we see in this millennium are due to precession, or a rotation in the tilt of the axis of the Earth, which results in weather systems moving. It's not comparable to today's global warming due to CO2 levels, and far be it from me to try and write history before it's happened, but this will be informative to look at civilizations in the past that, because of changing weather systems, have collapsed. But our story starts here in Colombia. There may be mosquitoes. We're going to look at the societies of San Agustin, high up in the valley of the Rio Magdalena, seemingly an entirely different river from where it becomes the waterway of the narcotraficantes and paramilitares in the north. And it's here that we can find one of the most significant artistic cultures of its kind. Unfortunately, as is the case with much archaeology, much has perished. No feathered or wooden artifacts remain, but gold, as does stone, endures. And we can see from artworks in both media that the relationship with nature of the tribal cultures in what is modern-day Colombia was one of interdependence. Not only in the agricultural sense, but also in the sense of the connectedness to and the deification of the seasons. And in spiritual terms. There are elements in European culture of transcendental nature, the pagan green man, the medieval thinker Thomas Aquinas, in the Enlightenment with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in Romantic and some modernist poetry and art, but in cultures like the San Agustin culture and in indigenous cultures surviving up to the present century is the shamanistic religion, an animistic religion believing in the complete interconnectedness of spirit and nature. Hence the shaman, or religious healer of the community, was able to take medicines and go into trances, transform themselves into syntheses of animal or bird spirits, and travel through the kingdoms of earth, water, and sky. The culture in the Guatavita area north of Bogota, whose leader, the conquistador, is called El Dorado, for the practice of covering in gold and throwing golden artifacts into the lake. And although this lake has been incredibly successful in keeping its secrets, the gold artworks that have been recovered across the country tell us much of the fascination with such shamanic syntheses of spirits from the animal kingdom. My favourite is this famous gold pictorial to be worn on the chest, which is a synthesis of the head of a bat from the night kingdom of the air and the body of the jaguar from the night kingdom of the land. I call it the Baguart, unhelpfully. And the Museo d'Oro, the Museum of Gold, good choice of name, in Bogota also reveals much of the shamanic culture. The alkaloid from the unprocessed leaves of the plant Erythroxylum coca can be released using lime, either in the cheek or using a poporo, a mixing jug with a dipper. And it gives the recipient transcendental feelings and also endurance of energy. Shaman would use this where available in the highlands, or if not available, ayahuasca or yage down in the Amazon basin, being another such healing plant for the shaman to enter the spirit world. These solid gold animals from the Museo d'Oro are testament to the imagination and craftsmanship with gold, including filigree, that the pre-Columbian cultures had, and to their deeply spiritual relationship with nature. Higher up in the Andes, and centered on the Altiplano of south of Lake Titicaca, is the birthplace of the Wari culture, with its advanced architecture. It's much closer then to being called a civilization. Interesting for the later Incas, Lake Titicaca was the birthplace of their oldest deities, the sun and the moon. The air is particularly dry, and the Milky Way, that was the pathway to the spirit world for the Incas, is visible to the naked eye. Tiahuanaco was the capital of the Tiahuanaco Empire, preceding the Wari Empire that gave birth to the Inca. And on the most important archaeological monument in Bolivia, the Puerta del Sol, is the image of their war god Viracocha, carrying a spear thrower and a staff. I became so fascinated by this image I decided to carve it in gesso plaster using a pointed steel file, which took several days. You can appreciate that the geometry of the thing is partly a result of the difficulty of the stone carving process. But when you look at painted art elsewhere in Mesoamerica, you see that the artists don't vary from this abstract geometric approach. In other words, that they found their aesthetic expression in it. And we'll return to this idea when we look at a painting of a female goddess from Teotihuacan in Mexico. The Puerta del Sol is a monolith, a single piece of stone, although it's now cracked. It's thought to be a calendar, and again shows the importance of the awareness of celestial motions in agriculture, and therefore survival, and through life and death comes religious significance and human sacrifice, a mainstay of pre-Columbian cultures. Before leaving South America, we should look at the Nazca culture and its zoomorphic designs in the coastal desert of Peru, made famous by the Swiss pseudo-archaeologist Erich von Daniken. The lines were made by removing surface stones to reveal undersoil in lines about 30 centimeters in width, rather like the white horses in Salisbury Plain. Archaeologists disagree on the nature of the lines and animals, theories ranging from representations of constellations and equinoxes to markers for aquifer water sources, for both are connected to agriculture and therefore religion. Please analyze this image. What do you see? Try and memorize these lines. We'll see them again soon. This is a photo I took of the equally famous, referring to the Nazca lines, equally famous Machu Picchu at sunrise. And the link between interpretations of and envisaging, we talked about Pareidolia earlier, and here a neurological phenomenon is raised to religious significance. We're looking at faces of gods in the landscape, and it's documented in other places in the Inca Empire, for example in Cusco, its capital, and here in Machu Picchu. It seems evident that the site was selected for the appearance of the god Huayna Picchu, that the Inca chose a place to settle where the landscape was a deity. And so to Central America.